Greetings, 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 greetings. It is I, King Clifford Jefferson. I Senator Godfrey, the fifth Canavan Jew, son of folk, ruler of Jerusalem. I'm the reincarnation of King Edgar the Peaceful, which we here at the Third Typical English Church of England refer to as Jesus Christ, or the Vicar of Christ, or Melchizedek, better known as the King of Righteousness. It is April 8th, 2025, which is equivalent to the Berber year 2975. I greet you in the name of my Queen Sister Galveston from the House of Galveston and Jordan, as well as many other houses for that matter, as well as Archbishop Belmont from the House of Belmont. I greet your name as well as all other members and staff, as well as ancestors, heirs, inheritors, and all the above. Today's lesson is called King's Alfred Plan, the truth. Once again, today's lesson is called King's Alfred Plan, the truth. You know, I always have a saying, he who writes your book sets a timeline. Time of it was when we were not. As the life of time began, the time will become what? And we will be no more. So for the three who are watching, besides Brother McGarrell from the House of McGarrell, who's always present, prompt, and on time, I would like for you to reveal yourself on the chat line. It's not a mandatory, but I would like to be able to respond to whoever it is I'm corresponding with if you choose to correspond. Once again, leave your comments in the chat, as well as your comment box, as well as like, share, subscribe to those, as well as provide free and common focus, which is welcome here at the Third Typical Church of England. And without further ado, let's get started with this marvelous lecture. This one, I thought everybody would want to check this one out. King Alfred's Plan, the truth. I mean the line should be lit up, but nonetheless, the party must go on. Once again, greetings, Brother Marion McGarrell from the House of McGarrell. Glad you were able to join us today. It's going to be a good one. I promise not to hold you long. I took my melatonin pill, so I hope I don't fall out on y'all. Okay, enough with the jokes. Let's get started. King Alfred, or a king who was named Alfred. King Alfred, or a king who was called Alfred the Great. He was born in 849 and he died in 899. Alfred the Great, our ancestor. Alfred the Great from 849 to 899 was the king of the West Saxons from 871 to 886, and king of the Anglo-Saxons from 886 until his death in 899. He was the youngest son of King Ethelwulf and his wife Osberth, who both died when Alfred was young. Three of Alfred's brothers were Ethelbald, Ethelbert, and Ethelred. reigning in turn before him. Reigned in turn before him. Under Alfred's rule, considerable administrative military reforms were introduced, prompting lasting changes in England. Okay, very important. Alfred the Great. All right. Now, the characteristics of him is unknown. So that's what we have to discover. First, we go to his name, the origin of his surname. Because we're dealing with demographics. Okay. Demographics determines one's political and civil status. Right. So let's look at the surname Alfred. Alfred's history, family crest, and coat of arms. It's found in England and Portugal. It's found in England and Portugal. Whoever this character is, whoever this entity is who bears the name Alfred, the origin of the surname is either from Portugal and England. Okay? Now, don't forget the time and era that he's living in regards to the demographics that we're talking about, which involves people in society, i.e., demos, and graphia, which means writing, depiction, or graph. Right? Writing, picture, or graph. Give me 1 second. Make sure you leave all your comments in the chat line. Etymology of the word Alfred. The Anglo-Saxons of Britain first developed the name Alfred. It was a name given to someone who was a personal name, Alfred, which literally means elf council. Elf council. Okay, so the word Alfred means wise elf or elf council. The surname Alfred was first found in Kent, i.e., Superman, Clark Kent. Keep that in mind. And originated there, and it was one of the oldest Saxon names. The family name originally allured and shown in the Domesday Book, compiled in 1086, and as holder of lands in Kent, even after the Norman invasion of 1066 by Duke of William, and that will be William the Conqueror. Okay, that will be none other than William the Conqueror. We also want to look at the time era which you were born, and that would be 849 AD Annos Dominios, which means in the year of our Lord. Okay, which will be 849 in the year of our Lord. Back then, they called themselves lords. So it's very important to look at it within the concrete, contrast to abstract. The year 849. If you look at the corresponding calendars, because it said Alfred the Great was king of the Anglo-Saxons, and we all know that the Anglo-Saxons were known as the English people. Okay? So as I always say, he who writes your book sets your timeline. Time of it was when we were not. The life of time began, the time will come when we will be no more. So as you can see here, there is no English king on this calendar back in 849. Hence the word Rex 84. That stands for 1984. But King Alfred was born in 849 AD. Also, Alfred the Great's plan. King Alfred the Great's plan. Very important to know who made this plan. Was it the plan that he created, or was it the plan somebody else made named after Alfred the Great? Okay? But as you can see, Alfred the Great, who was living in 849, there is no English calendar to correspond to the English people known as Alfred the Great, the predecessor of it and the founder of it, because there is no English calendar. So that would only mean that Alfred the Great would be a Berber, corresponding with what the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica says about the government of the Berbers, which was called Witten or Wittenmont, which we'll talk about in a second. We also want to focus on the things that are going on at this time in 849. Okay, because my last lesson that I just did was about feudalism and the origin of feudalism, starting with Rome and the barbarians from Rome that transferred from Rome to the Carolingians, from the Carolingians to William the Conqueror, and then on up to what we call Queen Isabella and Ferdinand the Second or the Third, whichever one it was. All right. Greetings, Countess Jones from the House of Jones. So 849, there is no English calendar to correspond with. So we have to keep in mind that there is a Berber calendar, and we also know that the Berbers were called barbarians as well. And we know that Alfred the Great in 889 unified the Anglo-Saxon Berber tribes, okay, known back then as barbarians, okay, which is now properly geographically defined based upon demographics, were actually called barbarians, known as Middle East and North Africans. Okay? You're going to qualify that under the term barbarian. So at the time of Alfred the Great being born, there's a couple of things going on in Europe. Frankish forces under King Charles the Bald invade southern France. Charles the Bald is from the Carolingian dynasty, as we see here. Don't take your focus off the Carolingian dynasty because they were ones responsible for feudalism. They inherited from Roman, and feudalism is just the same as slavery, servitude, and all the other synonymous terms. Okay? So Charles the Bald or Charles II, all right, is around in 849. A Carolingian, all right? Everyone needs to edge that into their head. Also, the Armenian Prince Bagrat II begins a rebellion against the Caliph al-Mutawakkil of the Abbasid Caliphs. Very important. So you got the Carolingians and the Abbasid dynasty, okay? And the events that are going on between the Carolingian and the Abbasid dynasty, okay? Now, we know that at this time, Alfred the Great is ruling, because he was not ruling, but he was born in 849. And at this time, there is no English calendar to correspond to him being qualified as an Englishman, but there is, in fact, a Berber calendar. And we've seen that in 889, when we deal with the Berber kingdoms, we're going to see that Alfred Great unified the Berbers in 889. Very important. I'm ahead of myself, but I need to do that so when you see it for yourself, it can come to remembrance. All right. So Berber calendar, and in the Berber calendar, the year is not 849. The year is 1799. Okay. Like today is 2025, and the Berber year is 2975. All right. So remember Charles the Bald from the Carolingian dynasty, which is a Frankish kingdom, and the Abbasid dynasty. All right. Very important. Now, in my last lesson, we talked about the origin of feudalism, which is slavery. Okay. So let's go back and revisit that real quick. Because today's lesson is King Alfred's plan, the truth. How many want to know the truth about King Alfred's plan? We already read about King Alfred, the time he was born in, and we can see that he, in fact, was under the calendar, under the Berber calendar, because there is, in fact, no English calendar to correspond with him being an Englishman. In fact, the English kings didn't come until William the Conqueror invaded England, and that was 1066, which brought in the feudal system that he inherited from the Carolingians, which they inherited from Rome. Okay, because when the Carolingian dynasty came to power, that was considered what they call the first phase of Rome, not from the abstract story, but from the concrete stories. Right? Very important. Feudalism, history of feudalism, not what somebody want to think feudalism is, but the history of feudalism. Now I'm backtracking because I talked about this in my last lesson. If you watch that, then you should be right on board. History. Feudalism is in various forms usually emerged as a result of the decentralization of an empire, such as in the Carolingian Empire in the 9th century AD, which lacked the bureaucratic infrastructure necessary to support cavalry without allocating lands to these mountain troops. Mountain soldiers began to secure a system of hereditary rule over their allocated lands and their power over the territory, which came to encompass the social, political, judicial, and economic spheres. Okay, in regards to feudalism, feudalism is a feudal tenure, and land tenure is a tenure just dealing with land conveyed without feudalism, i.e., there is no slavery going on. Right? I also want to go back to what AI said about feudalism. Those who weren't here for my last lesson. We call AI ancestral intelligence. A lot of you heard this already, but I have to go through it because newcomers. Feudal tenures, which is feudalism, the system where land ownership was tied to obligations of services wasn't created by a single individual, but evolved from Roman barbarians. Hear that? Roman barbarians and Carolingian institutions, with Norman conquest in England and in 1066 solidifying its structure. So once again, feudal tenure, the system where land ownership was tied to obligations of service, wasn't created by a single individual, but evolved from Roman barbarians and the Carolingian institutions, with the Norman conquest in England in 1066 solidifying its structure. Okay, everyone needs to get that on their dial plate. Carolingian kings like Charlemagne further developed this practice, granting land as a benefit to loyal noblemen in return for military services. The Norman conquest and feudalism in England, the Norman conquest of England in 1066 led to the establishment of a highly structured feudal system, with William the Conqueror declaring himself the sole allodial owner of the entire realm. Tenures and obligations. Under the system, land was held of the king, and all landowners from barons and knights were obligated to provide services to the lords and schooling military services. So we already know that. Okay, so now we can move forward, which is understanding because we're talking about England before the invasion of Carolingians, the Merovingians, William the Conqueror. We're talking about before that, okay? And we're talking about feudalism, and it said that feudalism started with Rome and it started with the Carolingians. So those are two people that we want to talk about, the Carolingians and the Romans. Because I'm coming to the understanding that they are, in fact, one and the same. Let's look at it. Carolingian Empire. I talked about this earlier, but I got to go through it again. We want to make sure that these barbarians are not the same barbarians that Alfred the Great unified, because these barbarians were fell under the authority of Charlemagne. Okay, these are the Carolingians that fell under the authority of Charlemagne, who was considered Roman barbarians, as we just heard it from AI. So the Carolingian Empire from 800 to 887. This is also the same time when King Alfred the Great unified the Anglo-Saxon kingdom. And we know, according to the calendar, there is no English kings. You didn't get that till William the Conqueror. So we can rest assured that all these kings could conclusively be, in fact, Berbers. Because we know, we go to 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, they'll show you that the Berber kingdom was Wittenmont, which is called Witten, which was wise counsel. And we know that Alfred the Great was a wise man, okay, because he was called Wise Elf or Elf Council, okay? So it says Carolingian Empire was a Frankish-dominated empire of Western and Central Europe during the early Middle Ages, okay? It was ruled by the Carolingian dynasty, which had ruled as kings of Franks since 751 and as kings of Lombards in Italy from 744. Now remember, the name Alfred comes from England and Portugal. And Portugal, it was unified with Spain, okay? Through two different eras, through the Spanish Empire as well as through the Kingdom of Castile, all right? And we talked about that in my last lesson. Hopefully we have time to touch on it again tonight. It says, so which ruled the Kingdom of Franks in 751 and the Kingdom of Lombard in Italy from 774. In 800, the Frankish king Charlemagne was crowned Emperor of Rome by Pope Leo III. In an effort to transfer the status of the Roman Empire from the Byzantine Empire when they were in conflict, going back to the Byzantine and Moorish Wars, as well as about the Vandalic Wars, which we're going to talk about in a second. This also goes into the invasion or the conquest of the Maghreb and the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula by Arabs, because the Arabs and the Carolingian had alliance back in the 8th century, which falls in line with what we're reading about now, involving the Carolingians, who were the feudal holders and the feudal tenures that involved slavery of those who descended from Alfred the Great, which was a different characteristics of a different type of Berbers. Very important to understand that. It says the Carolingian Empire and sometimes is considered sometimes considered the first phase in the history of the Holy Roman Empire. So the Carolingian Empire was considered the first phase in the history of the Holy Roman Empire. And we know about the Holy Roman Empire goes back to the 7th century, 8th century BC, okay, with Romans and Aurelius. And at that time, they're coming to existence. We well into the 22nd dynasty of the ancient Kushite dynasty, called those Libyan Berbers, okay, Shoshin the first, Shoshin the second. I talked about that already. I don't have time as a result of the time frame I have tonight. Okay, so we can see the Carolingian Empire, and we know the Carolingian Empire was under the authority of Charlemagne. And Charlemagne were kindred to the Romans because that was the first phase of the Roman Empire, which they clearly said, according to what we heard from AI, were barbarians. Okay? So now we have to examine the word barbarian to make sure that we're not pushed into that same group based upon the collection of data known as demographics. Okay? Known as demographics. Let's get it. Now let's just get a good look at Alfred the Great's wife before we go any further. This is Alfred the Great's wife, Elswith. That's Alfred the Great's wife, Elswith. everyone can agree that the characteristics when we came up to under the identity as black people is what they declare her to be. But based upon the new description of those barbarians, because if Alfred the Great unified the barbarian and this was his wife, then she must have been a barbarian as well. Okay, and if they were the barbarians and there was no English calendar and the only calendar that exists at that time was the Berber calendar, then we can consider that they in fact were the barbarians. Okay, very important to understand that, which would consider them to be the Berbers, which will be considered of Middle Eastern and North African descent. Okay, Middle Eastern and of North African descent. Okay, so with that, the title of this lecture is called King Alfred's Plan. So let's go there. King Alfred's Plan. I know you all heard about that. King Alfred's Plan. A plan for black people. King Alfred Plan, a plan for black people of African descent. What is he going? King Alfred's Plan. So we already know who King Alfred was. He was the King of Wessex. All right. He was married to Elsewhere, which we can see based upon her characteristics, she was of a darker complexion. We understand that at that time, based upon the calendar, there is no English king to qualify that King Alfred was in fact an Englishman, because the only calendar at that time we see was that of a Berber calendar, and out of all the calendars that existed on that, we identify with the Berber calendar. All right. So King Alpha Plan is a fictional CIA-led scheme supporting an international effort to eliminate people of African descent. To eliminate the people of African descent. That would only mean that these would be the people of darker complexion. And we seen Alfred the Great wife's complexion was of darker complexion. Okay? So we have to question if this plan was actually for us or somebody else. All right? Invented by author John A. Williams in his novel The Man Who Cried I Am. Williams described it as a government plan to deal with the threat of black uprising in the United States by cordoning off black people into concentration camps in the event of a major racial incident. Okay, so now we have to look at people of African descent and the people identified as black people. Once again, we got to look at the people of African descent and the people identified as black people, because these are ones are supposed to be going to concentration camp based upon Rex 84. What is Rex 84? Let's look at that before we go back to King Alfred's plan. Rex 84. Rex 84B, short for Readiness Exercise 1984 Bravo, was a classified scenario and drill development by the United States federal government to detain large numbers of United States residents deemed to be of a national security threat. In the event that the president declared a national emergency, this is FEMA. All right? This is FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Agency. Y'all better watch what's coming down the pipe. Okay? So Rex 84 was created for national security threat based upon Alfred's 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 King Alfred's plan. Okay. Rex 84 was created as a result of King Alfred's plan. Okay. For so-called Africans and black people. Okay. Now, when you look up, go back to King Alfred's plan, they're only dealing with a time era of people of African descent. Okay. They only dealing with a time era of people of African descent. Okay. And that time of the people of African descent during that time era at that time was not identified as black. Okay. It was called something else. They were called colored people. Okay. Very important that we understand that. All right. And that was not based upon the proper collection of data based upon demographics of your just sanguineous birthright inheritance from your parent or father, from your mother or your father. That was just dealing with some just soil, just being born on the soil, which does not make you a citizen. Okay? So King Alfred's plan was a plan that was created either by King Alfred the Great or by somebody else who just called it King Alfred's plan, just in case there was a scenario that resulted as a result of a national security involving people identified as black people. My brothers and sisters, this is happening now. And guess what? We are not the black people. We are the white people. Okay? We are not the black people. We are the white people. And when white people find out that they ain't the white people, that's when King Alfred's plan is going to be instituted and they're going to be taken and put in incarceration camps. And this is not the plan they created, it was the plan our ancestors created. Okay? Very important that you understand that as a result of what I'm about to go now with it. Okay? Black people is just a characteristics. People of African descent, let's visit that real quick. That deals with the African diaspora. And we know what diaspora mean, right? We know what that means. History of the diaspora of African descent people. This takes you back to the 1600s. Okay? History. We're reading it right now. The Atlantic slave trade, the Arab slave trade, and slavery in Africa. All deal with the African diaspora in regards to the people who will be subject to what they call King Alfred's plan. Okay? King Alfred's plan. That was a plan that was happening at that particular time, but it was not, in fact, from King Alfred. Because why would King Alfred enslave his own people? All right? Why would he do that? We are his people. Many Africans dispersed throughout North America, South America, Europe, and Asia during the Atlantic, Trans-Sahara, Red Sea, and Indian Ocean slave trade. So there was a big slave trade that was universal all around the world happening at the same time. Okay? And only one person or a group of people could be enslaved. You got the slavers and you got the enslaved. Okay? Very important. We know here in North America, the only person who was emancipated from slavery is just what people call black people. Okay? And that was a term that they gave us. All right? When in actuality, we were the white people, but when we were enslaved, they switched places with us. All right? How do I know it? I'm about to show you. Now we know, based upon what AI say, and based upon common sense, that Romans were the barbarians who brought in feudalism under Charlemagne, and Charlemagne was a Carolingian, and we know the Carolingians gave birth to the Merovingians. The Merovingians resulted in the creation of the House of Normandy, which was founded by Rollo, which William the Conqueror descended down from, who was also a Frankish king. Very important to understand that. All right. Very important to understand that. If any questions in the chat line, please let me know because I don't want to lose you. Right? Let's get it. All right. So Alfred the Great's plan for people of African descent At this time, the people of African descent was not under King Alfred's plan, because King Alfred's plan was the plan created before this plan we're talking about now. And at that time, when King Alfred created the plan, they were not called black people. Okay? They were not called black people. Let's prove it. All right? Let's go to the barbarian kingdoms. Since we know Charlemagne was a barbarian, right? A Roman barbarian at that, because Carolingians started the first phase of the so-called Romans. Barbarian kingdoms were states founded by various non-Roman, primarily Germanic people in Western Europe and North Africa following the collapse of the Western Roman Empire. In the 5th century Christian era, the barbarian kingdoms were the principal government in Western Europe in the Middle Ages. The time of the barbarian kingdom is considered to have come to an end with Charlemagne's coronation as emperor in 800, though a handful of small Anglo-Saxon kingdoms persisted until being unified by who? Alfred the Great. And we know Alfred the Great wife was Elizabeth, and she was a black-skinned. But the status of them as barbarians was not dark-skinned or black. They were considered white people, okay? Which under the demographics as classified in 2022, they are considered MENA, Middle Eastern or North African barbarians, okay, which we call them Berbers. Read a little bit more. The barbarian kingdoms of Western Europe were, for the most part, fragile and ephemeral. By the time of Charlemagne, once again, we know he was a Roman barbarian who was descended down from what we call the Carolingians, and the Carolingians gave birth to the Merovingians. And we know that the Merovingians never claimed to be descendants of God. So we can rest assured that the children of God are in fact the Berbers. Okay, because the Anglo-Saxons were those Berbers, and Alfred the Great was a Berber, because at the time Alfred the Great existed, there is no English calendar. The only calendar that existed is the Berber calendar. Okay, it says, by the time of Charlemagne's coronation in 800, only his Frankish kingdom and a few small Anglo-Saxon realms remained out of a once vast diverse network of kingdoms. Alfred the Great unified the Anglo-Saxon in 886, forming what would eventually be known as the Kingdom of England. So when Alfred the Great unified the barbarians, that was known as what? Everybody said the Kingdom of England versus the barbarians that was created by Charlemagne, known as what? The Carolingians. Okay? We must understand the difference. A lot of you might not believe it yet, but let's go to the word barbarian to qualify it. Barbarian. Barbarian. Now we can go all the way up to the top and define all the words, associate all the people who use the word barbarian, the Greeks, the Arabs, the Chinese. Everybody got their definition and meaning for the word Berber. But according to Middle Eastern and North Africa, they were called Berbers. Okay? MENA. Let's look at MENA first before we do that. MENA. We're still talking about barbarians, the same barbarians that was unified by Alfred the Great, and King Alfred the Great had a plan to unify us. All right? Very important. But as white people, because Middle East and North Africa, based upon demographics of the data collected now, is those Berbers. How I know it? Let's check it out. Middle East, North Africa. MENA. Exclusively and inclusively. I see a lot of messages. It says 12. I only see uh, 3 of them. So you know they messing with the algorithm, but it's all right. Middle East, North Africa. Like I said, there's 12 messages, but I only see 4 of them. So I apologize for the algorithm. Middle East, North Africa. All right. Is a geographic region which comprises in the Middle East, also called West Asia and North Africa together. However, it is widely considered to be more defined and a political alternative to the concept of Greater Middle East, which comprises the bulk of the Muslim world. All right. Now, this is very important. MENA, Middle Eastern, North Africa. All right. Middle Eastern and North Africa. Now, let's go to the present legislation. Okay? Let's go to the present legislation to qualify these barbarians from Middle Eastern and Northern Africa. Okay? Because they are, in fact, Berbers. Okay? How we describe barbarians and not how somebody else want to describe us. Because as I always say, you who writes your book sets your what? Timeline. So was introduced May 9th, 2022. So if this was introduced May 9th, 2022, and everybody trying to say that they're the free white person, well, where's the legislation to support that you are in fact the free white person? Because we got legislation right here in 2022, as well as in the revised statute, so saying that the Middle East and North Africa are in fact the black people. So the King Alfred's plan wasn't for the black people; it was for the white people. Because under the New Jersey revised statute, Title 52, colon 4-4 and 6, they clearly said the Middle East and North African are the white people on the federal level and the colored people on the state level. I'm not saying that. This is what we're gonna read. So that could not have been the plan of King Alfred for his descendants. It might be the plan for somebody else who are now going to be or take the place of the black people. Okay? Senate number 2415, State of New Jersey's 2019 legislator. All right? This is the legislation. Now we're going to go to the legislation that was submitted, and we're going to see the legislation that became law under the statute. Right here. That legislation have now become statutory law. Okay, and we're only talking about Middle Eastern and North Africa. Okay, that's what we're talking about. All right, we know King Alfred's plan was for exclusively for black people. Okay, to round them up and put them into incarceration camps. Okay, and King Alfred unified the barbarians. Okay, and we know that his wife Ellsworth was of a darkened complexion, but based upon the identification of those barbarians which he unified, they were now known as black people. They were known as white people. Let's look at it. MENA communities in this state and on the federal level are categorized as what? White. However, this racial identity has not matched the discrimination in housing, workplaces, and through daily life that many in the MENA community say they have faced. Why? Because there has been no data collected until now. All of a sudden now, they created all the agency of the state to now collect the data on MENA, Middle East and North Africa here. And all the other data they collect on everybody else is just going to determine not if you stay here, but if you get sent back home. Okay? Very important to see the transition. The MENA community in the state is on the federal level are categorized as whites. However, this racial identity has not matched the discrimination in housing, workplaces, and through daily life that many in MENA communities say they have faced. Many younger people, i.e., the descendants of those Middle East and North Africa people in the MENA communities, have compared their experiences to those in the communities of what? Color people. However, with a lack of clear category, this paradox has been difficult to show through what? The collected data, because they don't care about our demographics. Okay? So if it wasn't for me going down and placing this on the public record, we will be screwed. Okay? Because now this information is supposed to be put on the public record. Let's continue. 2023. It became law. That's this is six. It says right here. Existing state laws require demographics data to be collected, which includes Asian American. Uh, what was it? What was the group called? Asian American, Native Hawaiians, and Pacific Islanders. That's the first group. MENA is the second group. So that's the group we're concerned with because they were the ones who classified as white people. It didn't say anybody else. It said Middle East and North Africa were the ones who were classified as white people on the federal level, and on the state level, they were classified as color. All right. As we scroll down under New Jersey Revised Statute Title 52, colon 4 6, which we're reading now, it says existing state laws require demographic data to be collected, which includes the first group, communities. However, the collection by state agencies is often far too general and does not incorporate breakdown for the numerous ethnic groups within the first group. Additionally, state law does not require such a breakdown for MENA and the South Asian Indian diaspora. Okay, we talking about what? King Alfred's plan, and King Alfred's plan was about the what? African diaspora communities. Okay, and there's a lot of people over there in that territory who are not North African and who are not from the Middle East, based upon the geographical data collection going back to our ancestry, which we have to collect ourselves by doing the research. Because as I always say, everyone knows he who writes your books sets your timeline. Also, this data is not made as accessible as it can be to the public. So now this data should be updated on a regular basis and made accessible to the public so that the local government, the elected officials, decision makers, and the other stakeholders can use this information to strategically target programs for those who most in need. Once again, who are those in most in need? MENA, Middle East and North Africa. These are those descendants of King Alfred who created this plan to come in effect, which is called Doomsday. Doomsday, William the Conqueror called it the Doomsday Book because they are the records. Okay? They are the records. Let's go back to the word barbarian. Barbarian. If anyone like what you're hearing so far, please give me a thumbs up in the chat. If you don't mind, please give me a thumbs up in the chat. So if King Alfred the Great unified the Berber tribes or the barbarian tribes, okay, at the time when Charlemagne, a Carolingian, who descended down from the Romans, who were also identified as barbarians, we want to make sure that we fall into the right category of those who are called what? Barbarians. Okay, so we're looking at the word or the definition barbarian according to Wikipedia. Okay, now we can go all the way back up to the top. Go all the way back to the top. It says the barbarian is a person or a tribe of people that is perceived to be primitive, savage, and warlike. Many cultures have referred to other cultures as barbarians, sometimes out of misunderstanding and sometimes out of straight prejudice. Okay? So we have to take that into consideration when some people is telling your story. All right? Very important. So we can go through all the identities associated with Berbers told by all other people instead of us. Ancient Greeks, we know who they are. They're associated with the Romans, all right? So we don't want to listen to them, all right? So we go all the way down. So we can find ancient Rome. We don't want to talk about that. We know that's the Carolingians, all right? Who else? We don't want to deal with the Arabs as well. We don't want to deal with them. Why? Very important that we understand why. So we're going to go all the way down to where we can find some type of relationship that associated with us. Right here. Right here. We're still on the topic, barbarian. Now we know Alfred the Great unified the barbarians. Not the barbarians who were Roman, who descended down from Charlemagne, all right, who descended down from Rome. But we're talking about the barbarians who were considered the Middle East and North Africa, MENA, who was identified based upon the new demographic as the white people. Okay? Very important. The native Berbers of North Africa were among the many people called barbarians. You hear that? By the early Romans. And we know the Romans were who? The Carolingians. The term continued to be used by what medieval Arabs after, before being replaced by what? Those people now call themselves the Amazigh. All right? In English, the term Berber continues to be used as an exonym. The geographical term Barbary and Barbary Coast in the name of the Barbary pirates based on the coast and who were not necessarily Berbers who were not necessarily Berbers were also derived from it. Okay, so we see all these people associated with Berbers, but it was used as a term defining their characteristics, their actions, etc. Whereas we see when we're dealing with it from Middle East and North Africa, i.e., MENA, is associated with a group of people who identify barbarian as the tribal name associated with the customs and traditions that, according to the 1911 Encyclopedia Britannica, said it was based upon the government of the wise men. We know Alfred Great was a Berber because at that time, the only calendar that existed that we can truly identify with as those barbarians that was unified by Alfred the Great was the Berber calendar. Okay? Was the Berber calendar. Does that make sense to everyone? I hope so. All right. So Middle East and North Africa. Now this is very important. Why? Because we know that we got one group of barbarians that descended down from Alfred the Great, and he was the founder of the Anglo-Saxon, and we know that they were descendants of God, not like the Merovingians who were preceded by the Carolingians under Charlemagne. They didn't descend down from God. Okay, very important. Let's look at that real quick. Carolingian Empire would start the first phase of Roman Empire with Charlemagne. All right. Then you had the Merovingian dynasty. Let's look at that real quick before I move on with my lesson, with my beautiful lesson. Right here. During the final century of the Merovingian rule, the kings were increasingly pushed into a ceremonial role. Actual power was increasingly in the hands of a mayor of the palace and high-ranking officials under the king. In 656, the mayor Grimoald I tried to place his son Childebert on the throne in Austria, and Grimoald was arrested and executed by his son ruled until 661. When the Merovingian dynasty was restored with King Theuderic the, the, the fourth, who died in 737, the mayor Charles Martel continued to rule the kingdom until his death in 741. The dynasty was restored again in 743, but in 751, Charles' son Pepin the Short disposed the last king Childeric III and had himself crowned, initiating what they call the Carolingian dynasty. You see that? The Carolingian dynasty. So the Carolingian dynasty descended down from the Merovingian dynasty, and the Merovingian dynasty descended down from Clovis the First. Okay, so there you see a direct descendancy of these Roman barbarians. Okay, these Roman barbarians, and according to these Roman barbarians, they did not descend down from the same barbarians who descended down from the Anglo-Saxons, because it said the dynastic name or medieval name a Merovingi or Morihingi, son of Merovec, derived from the unattested Fracas form akin to the attested Old English Merovingi, with the final ing being a typical Germanic patronymic suffix. The name derived from Salian King Merovec, who, at the center of many legends, unlike the Anglo-Saxon world genealogies, the Merovingian never claimed to be descended from God, nor is there any evidence to support or regard them as a sacred people. Okay, right there. And as well as the Merovingian had long distinguished them from among other Franks. So when you think about these, you think about Conan the Barbarian. Okay, very very important to understand that. All right. So since we see that the Merovingian was birthed by the Carolingian, and the Carolingians go back into Charlemagne, and Charlemagne goes back into the Carolingians, who were those Romans and considered barbarians who were warned with the Anglo-Saxon kings, which was started by or unified by Alfred the Great, a barbarian and Berber, and he unified those Middle Eastern and North African because MENA means Middle Eastern and North Africa, who were identified by white people based upon the new classification. If everyone agrees with what I said, please give me a thumbs up in the chat line. Okay? Very, very important. So we see the Merovingians and the Carolingians. Now, we're not going to stop. We're going to start with the Carolingians now because it's very important because they are, in fact, as they said, barbarians. Okay? Now, let's look at this, brothers and sisters. Let's look at this. If the Carolingians were the founders of Philistines, which goes back to Rome, which were barbarians, right? Then we have to go back to a time and era that we can truly identify these people. Okay? This will be those old alliances. Okay? Those old alliances. We talked about them many a times, but we have to go back to it. Specifically talking about the Carolingians. Specifically. All right? Specifically. The old alliances, or Scots for Old Alliance, was an alliance between the kingdoms of Scotland and France against who? England, made in 1295. So the kingdom of Scotland and the kingdom of France was fighting against England in 1295, called the Old Alliance. Okay, everyone see that, right? If you scroll down, before 1295, and that happened to be the time with Edward I, through Scots independence, the first alliance of the old alliance was the Frankish and Opposite alliance. Once again, the Frankish and Opposite alliance. Everyone see that. So there's no confusion. So let's go to the Frankish and Opposite alliance. That will be the Opposite and Carolingian alliance. This will be that alliance, brothers and sisters. There was an opposite Carolingian alliance during the 8th and 9th century, affecting through a series of embassies, rapprochement, and combined military operations between the Frankish Carolingian Empire and the opposite Khalifa. Okay? What Frankish king and what opposite king or Khalifa are we talking about? All right? It says the alliance is likely to have formed the first between Pepin the Short and Al-Mansur, and later to have continued under Charlemagne and Harun al-Rashid. Okay, so the opposite Carolingian dynasty, which we know in fact that they were in fact barbarians, okay, barbarians, because we know the Anglo-Saxons were barbarians as well, but they were identified with the white people known as Middle East and North Africa before they became identified with black people. Okay, and we know that Alfred the Great unified those barbarians at the time Charlemagne was doing his thing, and we see that Charlemagne, founder of the Carolingian Empire, was in bed with who? The Abbasid dynasty, and we know that Muhammad descended down from the Abbasid dynasty. Okay, we must not overlook these facts. Okay, so we see the Abbasid Carolingian alliances was an alliance that descended down from the old alliances that involved conflict between Scotland, France against who? England. Okay, i.e., the Kingdom of England, which are known as the English people, but at this time there is no English calendar. The only calendar you see there is Berber calendar, and Berber is called the barbarians, and we know that the barbarians were unified by Alfred the Great in 886, warned against other barbarians known as what we call Charlemagne. Does that make sense to everybody? Please give me a thumbs up in the chat line. Okay, old alliance. So we got the Franco and Abbasid alliance, and we know the Frankish is the Carolingian, and the Abbasid is the Muslims. Okay. Then you got the Franco and Scottish alliance. Okay. The Franco and Scottish alliance was the same alliance that they called the Old Alliance, right? Which involved Scotland, France, and against who? England. They just said it. Alliance between Kingdom of Scotland, France, and England in 1295. But if you go back further, in the 8th century, there was already an alliance between who? France and the Abbasid dynasty. Okay? You cannot dispute these facts. Okay? And we know that Alfred the Great was not an Arab, and Alfred the Great was not a Frenchman, a Frankish king. He was a Berber. Okay? He was, in fact, a Berber because the demographics of the Middle Eastern or North African people was that of the barbarians and unified by Alfred the Great in 886, as I just said. Okay, and we can see that his wife was clearly of a darker complexion, but according to the new demographics identification, they are in fact called white people. Okay, so the people who are going to be put in those concentration camps pursuant to Rex 84, based upon King Alfred plan, is not us, the white people, the Middle East and North Africa. It's going to be those people who are going to take the place of those black people, which will be the people who used to be called white people. All right? When they get whiff of this, you know they're going to go crazy. And they already prepared. They are already prepared. Okay? So it's very important to understand this because it's going to take me here. So we see an alliance back in the 8th century between the Abbasid and the Carolingian dynasty. Okay? The Abbasid and the Carolingian dynasty. This is very, very important because it said the Merovingian dynasty and the Carolingian dynasty was one with the Byzantine Visigoths kingdom. They were one with the Byzantine and Visigoths kingdom. Okay? Very, very, very important. Let's see why. Because we have what? Let's see. I don't want to miss nothing. Okay, let's see. So we have the Carolingian and the Abbasid dynasty in the 7th century. All right? 7th century, the Carolingian and the Abbasid dynasty in the 7th century have an alliance against the Kingdom of England. And the Kingdom of England, prior to that alliance, in that time of that alliance, are unified with Spain and French houses. How we know that? Let's go take a look at it. This will take me here to the what was it called? It the Byzantine. Do I want to go there first? Yeah, let's go there first. Let's go here. Byzantine-Moorish Wars. Okay. Matter of fact, that's too far back. Let's not go that far back. Let's start here. Castilian Civil War. Let's go here. No, that's too far up. Let's go here. Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. Since they had a alliance opposite in the Carolingian dynasty was aligned, which was that in the 8th century, 777. Let's go back to the right conflict. Give me 1 second. Let me find what I'm looking for. Oh, the lion. All the lions. Okay, 777. Frankish opposite alliances, which is the opposite and Carolingian dynasty. Okay, very important. The opposite and Carolingian dynasty. So this is Arab and Frankish kings. Okay, this is Arabs and Frankish kings that we're talking about. All right, and the Frankish kings are the Charlemagne, and the Arabs is the is a so-called Muslim ruler. Okay, so this is 777. So that would take us back to the conflicts involving the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula as well as the conquest of the Maghreb. Okay, since we talk about Middle Eastern and North African descendants of the barbarians who was unified by Alfred the Great, we must take it to a time era where Alfred the Great was in conflict with these barbarians known as the Abbasid and Carolingian dynasty. Okay, very important. And that will take us to what? The um what was it called? Conquest of the Iberian Peninsula and the Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula and Muslim conquest of the Maghreb. Let's look at that real quick. Muslim conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. It was also called Al-Andalus, and it was also called Hispania. 711. Okay? 711. So this is before the Carolingian and the Abbasid dynasty. This is in 711. Okay? Location, the Iberian Peninsula. All right? Very important. Who are the belligerents in this conflict? The Umayyad Khalifa and the Visigoth kingdoms of the Kingdom of Austria. Okay? This is very, very, very important because this involves Arabs, okay, on the territory that was inhabited by Spanish, Frankish, and French kings, okay? Very important. And then the French and Spanish kings were married into the English houses, whereas though the Frankish kings and the Muslim kings were unified as war as a result of alliances, as a result of conquest, discovery, and feudalism. Okay, very important. So we got the Iberian Peninsula conquest of the Muslims who conquered the Iberian Peninsula. That goes back to what we call the siege of the Gibraltar or the Reconquistador. Okay, very, very, very important. All right, very important. Before you had that invasion, you had the invasion of the Maghreb, which was the Muslim conquest of the Maghreb. Let's go there. I'm a master teacher. Muslim conquest of the Maghreb. This is before the conquest of the Iberian Peninsula. This is 647 to 709. Okay? Who are the belligerents? The Byzantine Empire and the Muslims, Rashidun, the Khalifa, and the Umayyad Khalifa. Okay? Very, very, very important to understand what's going on. These are all Berber tribes. Okay? barbarian tribe, Middle Eastern and North African tribes that are fighting against Arabs who are living in the Middle Eastern, okay, who are trying to associate themselves with MENA, Middle East and North Africa, and that only is a result of what we call invasion conquest, which we're reading right now, okay? Very important to understand that. So let's precede this conflict, because this is in the 8th century. This is in the 6th, 7th, and 8th century. Okay, very important. So let's go back before this. This will take us to what we call the Castilian Civil War. Once again, the Castilian Civil War. No, not the Castilian Civil War. This will take us to what we call the Vandalic War and the Byzantine Moorish War, because we're talking about the Byzantine Empire and the Moorish, right? The Byzantine Empire and the Moors, 647 to 709. Let's go back to 533 now. Okay? Let's go back to 533 and see who are the belligerents in this conflict. Same people. Byzantine Moorish Wars, 533. So we're going back in before then, and there's a conflict going where? In Tunisia, Algeria, Libya, and Morocco. Okay? This is in the Maghreb. Okay? This is in the Maghreb, but the conflict is between Arabs. So that takes you to that. It shows you where the conflict of the invasion of the Maghreb and invasion of the what we call the Iberian Peninsula that's happened in the 8th century goes back or predates the 7th century. We go back to the 6th century. All right, we see it right here. The Byzantine Moorish Wars were a series of wars fought between the Byzantine Empire and various Berber kingdoms, which formed after the collapse of the Roman Empire. Okay, very important. Byzantine Empire and other Berbers. So we know these Berbers are a mixture of Arabs, and these are a mixture of what we call the Berbers who are living on the Iberian Peninsula. Okay, because this is a Byzantine Moorish Wars. Okay, this is also involved the Valdic Wars. Okay, because these are all involving Frankish, Nordic, Arab barbarians. Very important. So the same Byzantine Moorish wars that we see involving the Byzantine Empire, and the Byzantine Empire is those who are already living on the Iberian Peninsula, okay? Who are already living on the Barbary coast, okay? Before it was named those terms by those Arabs who invaded it through what we call conquest. All right, very important. Let's go here. Developed what you call the Vandalic Wars. Let's look at the Vandalic Wars. Happened at the same time, 533. So we just don't have the Arabs who are barbarians. We also have the Vandalics who are the ones who came from North Caucasus Mountains, Southern Caucasus Mountains. Okay, and they're causing conflict in North Africa, Middle East and North Africa. It says the Vandalic Wars from 533, the same time you got the Byzantine and Moorish Wars. So you got the Vandalic Wars against the Byzantine Empire, and you got the Moorish Wars against the Byzantine Empire. Come on now. So we know that the Byzantine is not Moorish, and the Vandals is not the Byzantine. So that makes only sense that the Byzantine will be the Berbers. Let's prove it. Belligerents, Vandal kingdoms, and the Byzantine Empire. This is very, very, very important. All right. Why? Because the conflict is the same place that the conflict was taking place with the Byzantine Empire and the Moorish. Where's the territory? Let's look at it. The Maghreb and the Iberian coastline. The Maghreb coastline and the Iberian coastline, known as the Barbary coast. Right there. Byzantine ruled in North Africa when they were warring in the Vandalic Wars. Okay? Very important. It says it right here. The rapid establishment of Eastern Roman rule in today's Maghreb was the result of increasing political vacuum in African provinces of the former Western Empire and the dramatic successor state of the Vandals, which were primarily characterized by a dissolution of regional power or administrative structure. It's right in our face, brothers and sisters. It's right in our face. All right. Let's see. So with that, we have to understand that the barbarians, in closure, which were unified by Alfred the Great, were those who are identified as Middle East and North Africans. Okay? Middle Eastern and North African. And the reason why I'm telling you that is because there's legislation being put in place for your protection. Okay? And that protection for us in New Jersey is based upon us not just being born here on the soil, but as a result of us having blood ties to the soil by way of the people who were here prior to the so-called discovery of the old world, the new world, which was actually the old world. Okay, so it says here in closing, New Jersey Revised Statute 52:4-7. Okay, it defines ancestry. Read it for yourself. Group 3, even though they got all these people in here, each major Middle East and North Africa MENA group, including but not limited to Algerian, Bahraini, Egyptian, Jordan, Kuwait, Lebanese, Libyan, Morocco, Omani, and Tunisian. All these groups of people are trying to identify as the Middle East and North Africa. Okay, but according to the barbarian term, okay, according to the barbarian term, it clearly says that the barbarians were of Middle Eastern and North Africa. So that means that they're talking directly to us. If you're not listening, then they can be talking to somebody else who choose to listen. Okay? So with that in mind, Alfred the Great, who unify us not because we were born on the soil, but because it was our birthright. Okay? It was, in fact, our birthright. And New Jersey Revised Statute qualifies that because it says that the data collected based upon the demographics, all right, and we know demographics means people in society, and graph means writing graph or depiction or any other synonymous word. It says right here, each state agency that directly or by contract collects demographic data as to ancestry of residents of the state of New Jersey shall use separate collection categories and tabulates for each of the following. So every category that reflects the demographics of anybody who claims to be part of those 5 categories, inclusively, we're talking about MENA, then it must be based upon the identity based upon not just the language, but the culture, the custom, etc. And that's based upon ancestry. And they define ancestry as what? Ancestry means the respondent's self-identification of the respondent's origin or descent, roots, heritage, or place where the respondent or the respondent's parents or ancestors were born. Okay? And we know that if you read United States versus One Kim Art, that is the precedent for um, uh, those who are emancipated by way of the 14th Amendment, and your citizenship should be construed to the common law of England. And within that case law, it also shows you the right of inheritance that was declared by way of what we call primogeniture of the firstborn. Okay, primogeniture of the firstborn, in which a lot of you don't have that privilege as a result of us being considered, or you can be considered interstate, meaning that dead. You're considered dead. So as a result of the land is allodial, which means it becomes subject to escheatment, and the only one can escheat the land is the crown, because the king personifies that. Okay? So with that, let me make sure. covered everything. Yeah, I did. So there's your King Alpha plan, brothers and sisters. All right? There's your King Alpha's plan. Any questions? In the chat, please let me know before I go. Any questions in the chat, please let me know before I go. Rex 84 is not for us. King Alpha plans is not for us. It was designed for our protection once doomsday came underway. And it's underway now, brothers and sisters. It's underway. Any questions about King Alfred plan? Any questions? His plan was for the Middle Eastern North African barbarians to rise up under your true name as Berbers. Okay? Because now there are legislation being implemented to record that data. And I'm pretty sure they ain't gonna be knocking on doors asking you if you are from Middle East or Northern Africa. 9 times out of 10 they might get shot. Okay, so somebody should do it for you, and rest assured that has already been done. Okay, pursuant to New Jersey Revised Statute 47:1A-1, Public Record Act. Okay, thank you, Brother McGarrell. Thank you, Brother Nunley. Thank you, Thomas, McGarrell, and everyone else who's here today. Thank you for showing up. Thank you for showing up. All right, post your comments, leave them in the chat, like, share, subscribe, donate if it's in your will and in your heart, as well as to continue to progress yourself and this understanding. And with that, I'm going to greet you as I always going to meet you, and that is in love and peace. Peace.